My absolute favorite game of all time is Batman Arkham Asylum. I've loved it and the series so much ever since I first played it, and I wanted to share that love with you all today. Our last video on Arkham Asylum going over the unused content did really well, and brought us a lot of love from fans of the games. And before I say anything about the topic for this video, I want to address the absence of what was supposed to be the next video after that. If you don't care and you just want to get to the point of the video, skip to this point. A video going over the unused beta content for Arkham City seemed like a really fun next video for the channel, and a lot of people wanted to see it, so I got to work. The problem is I was able to find nothing solid about the unused content for the game in the literal years since I've started working on it. I've looked all over the internet and even contacted a lot of people who worked on the game, constantly trying to get interviews with at least one of them, but they all just stopped messaging me when they realized how small my project really is. Making a video for a YouTube channel with under 500 subscribers. Despite all my efforts and genuine passion for making that video, I don't think it's going to be able to happen unless I get a significant boost in things to talk about for it. I'm sorry for disappointing those of you who really wanted to see that video, but I'm still up to keep trying, and maybe one day I'll be able to. Anyway, with that out of the way, let's talk about my story with Arkham Asylum. I was born on October 27th, 2003, and growing up I loved superheroes, specifically DC heroes. I still love Marvel a lot though, to be clear. I grew up on Super Friends, Justice League Unlimited, Batman Beyond, and The Batman. I had the movies and shows on DVD, and I would watch them so often that my parents actually had to put them on a high shelf to stop me from watching them non-stop all day. I had the toys, and I loved to dress up as my favorite characters, eventually getting to the comics too around 3rd grade. These are all qualities that still continue to this day, but like most kids I eventually got into video games. I pretty much loved any video game I got, but of course, superhero games were always something I gravitated towards for obvious reasons. I had a Wii and a DS playing games like Spider-Man 3, Iron Man, Lego Batman, and if you counted as a superhero game, then Transformers too. But my favorite superhero game at the time was Justice League Heroes. My dad had a PS2 that we played on sometimes. I played Lego Star Wars on it, and me and my dad would play Justice League Heroes. I didn't get to see a lot of my dad when I lived with him, and he was still married to my mom, because he worked all day and he got home after my bedtime. So a lot of the time when I did see him, it was just in the mornings or on the days he had off. So those moments I had with him to play video games are some of my best memories from that time period. I loved playing games with my dad. After my parents divorced, I lived with my mom, and I saw my dad's on Wednesdays and Sundays, which were the days he had off. Fast forward to 2009/2010, I don't know exactly when it was, but I'm in 1st grade, and I go over to my cousin's house to hang out with him a lot because he was my best friend, and we played video games together. One day I come over and my uncle says that my cousin isn't here yet, so he says, "Hey, one of my friends let me borrow this new Batman game for my PS3. You can go in my room and play it until Aiden gets home." So I go up in his room, and he sets up Batman Arkham Asylum for me, and leaves me in the room. I start the game, and I continue a save file that was already made. It was in the beginning of the game, right before your first encounter with Zsasz, and I'm immediately impressed with how cool the game looks, and how awesome Batman looks. In this part of the game, you're given a sort of tutorial on how to do some basic things, like use detective mode, grapple onto and between vantage points, and take down an enemy without being seen. But after this, you watch a cutscene, go into a vent, and continue the game. But that's not what happened. When I played this part, I swung between the vantage points, took down Zsasz, watched the cutscene, and then I went back up. The way Batman took down Zsasz was so cool to me. How he glides through the air. So I go up and I glide back down. And I want you to know I was young, I was 5 or 6 years old, and the simple act of gliding through the air hit a certain part in my brain, and it was the most fun I'd ever had doing anything up to that point. Gliding in this one room made me so happy that I did it for the rest of the time I was playing. I remember my cousin came home, and instead of going downstairs to see him, I called him up to check out what I was doing in the game. I showed him the gliding. He didn't really understand why I was so happy because he was like 2 or 3, but I was obsessed with it. I remember leaving their house that day still thinking about the Batman game and gliding through that room over and over. I kept asking my mom to take me back so I can play more, and when I eventually did go back, they had given the game back to their neighbor and they didn't have it anymore. So I played with my cousin as normal, but I couldn't stop thinking about that Batman game. Next time I saw my dad, I told him about it because he's a big Batman fan too. Told him about this awesome Batman game I played at my uncle's house. So we went to our GameStop, and my dad bought a refurbished Xbox 360 and a copy of Batman Arkham Asylum for us to play. Finally, me and my dad had a game to play together again. And even though it was a single-player game, we didn't mind switching off the controller to play it that way because the game was just so awesome. I remember going to see my dad, hanging out with him and my sister at the movies or at dinner or something, then coming back to his apartment and playing Batman Arkham Asylum. We played the entire game together. I played the main game, and my dad loved finding the Riddler trophies. Those days are my absolute fondest memories of me and my dad. This point in my life was Arkham Asylum and nothing else. I would play it over and over and over. From that point onward, me and my dad were super fans of the series. I eventually asked for my own Xbox 360 for Christmas so I could play Batman at home. It was my first obsession over entertainment and lasted through and beyond each one that came after. I would write about it in my school assignments. I would even make little paper versions of the gadgets and walk around the playground pretending I had detective mode on. And ever since then, I've been playing these games. Even when City and Origins came out, I still went back to Asylum just because I loved it so much. It has stayed my favorite game of all time from the point that I first played it till today. But to like a game that much is to like it more than just the memories and nostalgia. So here I'll talk about the game itself and why it still holds up for me just as much and tops all the others in my mind. I remember the bats going over the logos in the beginning being so cool to me. And once you start the game, you go through an interactive credits roll, which is really cool for setting up the environment. Seeing the asylum and how it normally operates and getting more story detail on how Joker and his goons ended up there, on top of meeting characters you'll see later in the game, like Dr. Young, Aaron Cash, Quincy Sharp, and Killer Croc. Croc especially is cool because he was so scary to me when I first saw him, and introducing him to the story this early gets him in your head, like thinking, when am I gonna have to fight him? After that, you watch a little cutscene that I always skipped because I just wanted to start playing the game every time I started a new save file, and you're put right into the gameplay. Right in the middle of 3 goons for your first time controlling Batman, besides the beginning credits roll. It's you fighting the enemies, and the free flow combat system was like nothing I've ever played in a game up to that point. Fighting in video games for me was just like spam the button, or shake the Wiimote, or hold down and press B to smack ground. But suddenly being shown a game that has combat that works so well and it so easily was something new to me. It wasn't just a beat 'em up game like Justice League Heroes. You actually had to think about what you were doing to do better in combat. Sure, you could just try to brute force it, but the game really rewards you for playing by its rules and giving you more points the better you do in fights. Each new thing you do is presented in a way that's absolutely a tutorial, but it doesn't feel that way. It doesn't feel like a trial course to get you familiar with the game. It's fully integrated and makes the game feel more immersive, which is something I personally think it does better than any other game in the series. The things you do are presented in a way that makes sense within the story and context. The bio menus are stylized like pages of a book, and also the tapes you find throughout the game to give you more story elements, which all blend together with the art style and overall tone of the game perfectly. The essential gadgets you get in the game aren't unlocked when you get a certain amount of points or just given to you by someone in the story. They're all owned or created by Batman, which makes you feel even more like the character. When Batman needs something to help him, it's not some convenient NPC that gives him the exact solution to his problem. It's him that creates his own solutions out of what he has. Contrast this to the later games where the menus and gadgets feel more like they're there because this is a video game and not because Batman would actually use them. And sure, you could say the later ones are going for like a Bat computer vibe to them, which is still cool to me, but it reminds me more of like a generic futuristic aesthetic, akin to like Halo or Mass Effect. I see a lot of people citing Arkham City as their favorite in the series, and while I really love it, and every game in the series in fact, there are some little things they couldn't get right for me like they did with Asylum. Take for instance the remote electrical charge. At this part in the game, you're sealed in a room, and the only exit requires an electrical current to open a door. So what does Batman do? I genuinely couldn't tell you because he goes over to like some little electrical machine doodad and like takes out some electricity, I don't even know, out of it, and then he constructs a gadget with it. Maybe this is what he pulled out? I don't know. To me, it just kind of gives off like an And then he took the shock out of the shock box and he made a shotgun. Contrast this to the gadgets in Asylum. You get the explosive gel in the trunk of the Batmobile after stopping goons from trashing it. Batman gets the gadget as a precaution. Like, I might need this later. And that works way better than, oh dang, I need some like electrical shoot thing. Hold on, let me make one out of this little. Okay, awesome. And in Asylum, there are also moments where he needs a gadget and doesn't have it. Like in the Botanical Gardens, the Joker traps Batman over a large gap. So instead of Batman just pulling some like shit off the wall or something and making the solution to his problem, he calls the Batwing to drop off the line launcher, using his location in the greenhouse to his advantage. That's a much better way of going about it for me. Or what about the cryptographic sequencer? When you get that gadget, Batman just pulls it out, suggesting he had it the entire time, but it was useless without the download codes, which only Quincy Sharp has. Why didn't Batman just have the codes in the first place? Because this is still fairly early in Batman's career, where the Asylum staff still trusts him enough to let him in, but we hear in the Chronicles of Arkham that Quincy Sharp doesn't really even like Batman, and a guard in the beginning of the game questions Batman's authority.
I watched in silence as he brought in the woman. Halt tight!
How come they let Batman pass security?
So it makes sense that Batman wouldn't really be trusted with these codes in the first place, at least in this point in him being Batman. While rescuing the Warden, he gets the codes from him, allowing him to now use it. And most of the other gadgets are Batman creating or gathering them just in case he needs them, like the Batclaw or its upgrade. And the HUD doesn't really have any permanent distractions on the screen either. It just leaves you with your tools when and if you need them. When you have objectives on the screen at all times in the later games, it just feels like I'm going from one place to the next because the game is telling me to. But in Asylum, it always makes you figure it out. But you'll also have access to the map in case you need help. There are tons of times where the game shoves a dead end in your face and tells you to figure it out. And you do that not by looking where your objective is, you use the resources you have. Like the spray-painted arrows on the ground that Joker leaves for Batman whenever he's being led in the trap. Or using the forensic scanner to follow a trail. All this backtracking and exploring you have to do where the game leads you the wrong way makes you more familiar with your environments and encourages the player to explore more. And this is complemented by just how much detail the game designers put into the game. Its tone is my favorite out of all of the games. In the beginning, you are trapped. Everything is small and claustrophobic. It's dirty and old, and you feel like you're going insane. You see what I'm getting at? They made the Asylum part of the Asylum like a prison for the player. The first 20 minutes in the intensive treatment building is full of tight spaces and a sense of direction that needs to be established by the player. You go through the beginning of the game not only learning how the game works, but also learning what the game expects for you and learning the base level of other mechanics like scanning for riddles or using your forensic scanner, taking down a predator room. And the part I think does this the best is the first mini-boss with the Titan. When you try to hit the enemy, you see that it does nothing. In fact, he doesn't even have a health bar, and the game conditions you to know how to evade the charges from him, and even give you a chance to figure out how the batarang will disorient him. This boss is actually impossible to lose, and purely serves the purpose of giving the player a practice for the most common type of boss in this game, which are the Titans, and even Bane. After you learn all of this and find your way out of intensive treatment, it really feels like a breath of fresh air, as if you just broke out of the prison yourself, and now have free reign over the area. On top of this, the game also gives you its first showing of how beautiful the art style and the tone is. I'll just play this scene for you to show you instead of telling you, because it really is that amazing. The old Victorian Gothic aesthetic of this game is continued throughout the entire playthrough, and gives the game its own unique identity. No other game in the series shows this kind of individuality for me. The only one that really comes close is Origins with its winter and Christmas motifs. But that's a story for another video. What I'm trying to say is it's consistent in the emotions that it inflicts on the player. You don't know whether to be scared or impressed by everything you see. To me, it's kind of like a horror game in the way that it presents itself and drops you into an uncomfortable environment that you know is dangerous, but you don't know what to do about. The entire series still has scares and other horror elements, but none ever captured it like this one. And that's why I always enjoy coming back to it. I can always drop who I am in real life and become the Batman, and explore this game for everything that it has. The immersion is a big factor in why a lot of people enjoy single player games, and maybe it was because of how young I was when I first played it, but this game did it perfectly. But enough about the visuals and tone, let's talk about the gameplay. The main part of a video game is being able to play it after all. So how does that hold up there? This is the only part of the game that I think doesn't hold up as much as the others in the series because of this being the first one. Of course, City, Origins, and Night are going to feel better and have more polished mechanics than Asylum. And I think that's the reason a lot of people tend to just move on from this game after they complete it. Everyone has different things they look for in a game, and if yours is having the most fluid movement and physical abilities, then you're better off playing the later games that offer more in terms of gameplay. For me personally, the things that are absent from Asylum that came later in the series don't bother me at all because this is a much smaller and simpler game. Sure, being able to grapple mid-glide is very helpful in the later games, but I can't think of a lot of places where it would help in the Asylum, since most of the game takes place inside the buildings. Even the glide mechanics of later games, which is one of my absolute favorite parts, don't need to be in this first one for much of the same reasons. It's small, so gliding is mostly from going from a high place to a further low place. It's not to glide across a city. Another part of the gameplay I really enjoy is the variety of how you can use all the gadgets. Almost each and every one has a secondary purpose, and sometimes even more, giving the game the replay value of finding different ways to solve different problems. Of course, the later games have this too, but what I'm trying to say is the gameplay differences between these games are not enough for me to stop loving this one the very most. There's always something I can come back to and explore. I won't talk about the story of the game too much because it actually isn't my favorite in the series. That goes to Origins and Night, but Asylum having a plot that ties together a lot of Batman's biggest foes into one place, where he has to fight them one by one, sometimes multiple times, is really cool. The last thing I'm going to talk about is the mysteries surrounding the game, because this game had a lot that got you thinking, a lot of things that made you look deeper into it, and allowed you to play it in yet another way. You can listen to all the interview tapes that would help build the world, or you can even go to the real-life Arkham Care website that the devs made for the game. It's no longer up, but you can still find it on the Wayback Machine. There was so much to talk about when this game came out, like the secret room in the warden's office, or the 3 ending screens meant for the future games. Little things I used to wonder about is the Ratcatcher gear in the vents and Ra's al Ghul's body disappearing after you complete a riddle. Not to mention the random guy that was just inside a cell outside Quincy Sharp's cell. I now know that this was a fan that won the opportunity to be inside the game, but before I knew that, this was a huge mystery to me. All in all, this game just has charm and replayability that isn't as present in the other games for me personally. I can always go back to it and be back to the Asylum like I'm home. I know the game front to back, and yet I can always find something more to do. And for that reason, it's not only my favorite Arkham game, but my favorite game of all time. Thank you guys so much for watching this video, and if you liked the video, please leave a comment telling me that you'd like to see more, because hearing your feedback is really helpful. And maybe I can do more videos like this more often. Have a wonderful day, everyone.